Thanks. I had known precious little about Noel Rockmore before the article in this issue. I was aware of him vaguely, but it's been a great pleasure to find out a lot more about him. And one of the first words that comes up when people start talking about Noel Rockmore is genius. And then when the people who knew him talk a little bit longer, the other words start to emerge, like difficult, eccentric, drunk, nasty. So there were not a lot of people who were able to sustain a really long-term friendship or relationship with Noel Rockmore, but we have with us tonight one person who did. That's Shirley Marvin, and she is the collector of all of these works right here. She did a lot more. She has done a lot more than that, though. She moved to Louisiana in 1952 along with her husband, who was a real estate developer. She managed while raising 3 children, one of whom is here tonight. That's Tee Marvin, and his wife is Tee Marvin. So while she was raising these 3 children, she also managed to be a leader of the League of Women's Voters, all the way from the Earl Long era through the campaign of Michael Dukakis for president. She earned a master's degree in sociology and worked for a number of years at the Department of Education in Baton Rouge. She chaired a committee to bring a women's pavilion to the World's Fair in 1984. So this Noel Rockmore and his work is a great deal of her life, but by no means all of it. And one other thing that I wanted to tell you about before the Marvins come up and talk about their experiences is that another thing that emerged as I read about Rockmore was his uncanny ability, it seems, to draw people in and have them do things that they probably wouldn't do on their own. And for instance, there was a story that I came across about one of probably his longest term girlfriend who would come home after a long day of work and be exhausted, and he'd say, "Come watch me paint." And no, come on, at least let me change my clothes. No, come watch me paint. And she would sit down and watch him paint. But she would say she really actually didn't mind because she felt like she was in the presence of greatness. And there was another story about a landlord who heard odd noises coming from Rockmore's apartment even after he had gone out. So he went upstairs to investigate, and he found a young woman handcuffed to the handle of the oven, fully clothed and fully willing to be there, because she said, "Well, no, he just hates to be alone." I don't know, maybe it's apocryphal, but the landlord swore it was true. And so with that, I'm going to let the Marvins come up and tell you about the hold that Rockmore has had on their lives, even after his death. So if you will welcome, please, Shirley Marvin, Rich Marvin.
Greetings. We are the Marvins, and I'm a former middle school teacher, so I've got this 20-minute thing under control. We're going to be fast, and we're going to be loud. And Mom, I might have you, is this movable, or it stays right there?
It can rotate a little bit. It won't come off.
Move it over here. I'm going to
let her stand right there, sure.
Just in case it needs to be. So, I'm going to introduce first my mom, Shirley Marvin, and she is the reason that I am here in many different ways. But Shirley was from Boston, Massachusetts, and married a Harvard guy, and started her family in New York. And then he was a shopping center developer, and he decided he wanted to come down to the Banana Republic of Baton Rouge in 1952. There was opportunity there. There was a main street. There were 3 stores on the main street. He could parlay that into a shopping center empire, et cetera, et cetera. And Shirley, with 2 children at that time, said, "Sure, I'll go along." She had actually been schooled in politics with her father-in-law, was used to going to political meetings throughout the New York boroughs. So all of a sudden she arrives down here in Louisiana. Earl Long's the governor. She has complete access, something that she wasn't used to. You can schedule a meeting with Earl and go tell him how you feel about this and that. And she was a political activist. She was in the League of Women Voters, Civil Rights Movement, et cetera, et cetera. Shirley was all in and loved it. And Wilbur, who's very busy doing shopping centers, it was okay. You know, she was very helpful to the integrating into the Baton Rouge community at that particular time. And so Mom liked art. She and her sister had studied art, and they liked to go on little art junkets when they were in New York, and they'd pick up a $100 Reginald Marsh and a $50 George Bellows just at the time in the 50s and 40s when they were available. And so she had that background, and that's how she came to Louisiana. Now I'm going to introduce my wife.
And I'm going to stand over here so I'm not in the way of...
Right, I don't mind it. And these are all Rockmores, and we thought, in case you get tired of us, you've got the Rockmore. The art always wins the day, and Mom has told us that since the beginning, that get folks to pay attention to the art, that will win the day. So, on my wife, we are from Baton Rouge. We were both born in the same hospital, Lady of the Lake, 3 months apart. She's much older than I am, as you can see. So we grew up in Baton Rouge. She's actually from Ascension Parish, Gonzales.
Jambalaya capital of the world.
The jambalaya capital of the world. And we grew up, and actually, when I was young, and I have my good friend Hank Simpson, best friend for life, right here. Hank, raise your hand. When Hank and I were young and going to school in Baton Rouge, Mom said, whatever you do, don't go down to Ascension Parish because there's underage drinking and there's wild women on the river. They have these bars, et cetera, et cetera. So of course, we had the ticket, and off we went. I met my lovely bride. And I'm going to jump up to the story because we've done all sorts of things. I'm a school teacher by trade, middle school science teacher, taught middle school, the front lines of everything. So I did that for a good 20 years, and then we ran a computer company when computers came out. And then we took a product, the top product, in a company up on Cape Cod where we lived at the time. We have 5 children. And have raised them all. They're all, the last one is in college, so we've made it to the empty nest. And so here we are. And there was a new president at the company that we both worked for, and we were terminated. Terminated because they made a strategic decision to go elsewhere.
Well, to drop education.
To drop education.
And that's what we were...
Right, that's what we did. We got the product into the hands of teachers and students across the country. We were great at it. We were great at marketing, trade shows, branding, et cetera, et cetera. So I was kind of bummed out, to say the least. And she says, "Oh, no pouting. Let's go help your mom because she's got some artwork that
she had asked us to go check on after Katrina."
Right.
And after Katrina, we moved her with us for not quite a year.
Right.
And at some point after this happened, it's like, well, since you have time now.
Right. So we decided that we'd go down to Louisiana and help Mom go through her storage. And
we thought it was going to be a weekend.
A weekend deal, and we weren't sure. She wasn't quite sure how many works there were, but she knew she had some art that needed to be documented and checked on it and made it through Katrina, and so we were...
Well, we didn't just go there. We had made plans and all because my mom was really kind of funny about us going in any place after Katrina because she thought there might be mold and everything. So we really
This is
wanted,
1 year after Katrina. The city's sort of back to normal. Nobody's wearing hazmat suits anywhere.
Yeah, anyway, so my mom, we got the gear, we got the white suits, the blue gloves, the goggles, the breathing out. It was Darth Vader going in. People's like, how y'all doing?
Right. Storage people looking at us like we were from Mars. I'm not particularly happy, but I'm doing it because if my mother-in-law says to do something, I will do it because she produced the best daughter in the whole world. So we get into the storage and we open it up, and there are it's filled. It's about this size. One of the units. There were 3 units. It's about this size, and all there is boxes, neatly organized boxes.
Labeled, everything.
Labeled, etc. And we start taking them out, and looking at them, they're these beautiful works of art, and sketchbooks, works of art, oils, sculptures, pastels.
You couldn't get in there. We had to take things out.
Right, we started taking them out one at a time, and
like a little staging area.
And it was overwhelming. 1,400 works later, we realized that we'd come upon, as John Ed Bradley called it, the tomb of Rockmore, and we were overwhelmed, completely overwhelmed. This looked like
6 months it took to just do a timeline because we wanted to figure out who he was. And if he had works out there, and we found out his parents were very famous too, so we started researching them.
Right. Well, first we asked Mom what's going on, right, because it was quite surprising at that time. And at that point, you said you felt he was an undiscovered master, and that the only way he could be discovered is if somebody had kept a large chunk of the collection together for a period of time. So then we were still concerned. So we looked it up online, and I told Mom, I said, I'm going to look this guy up online, and if he doesn't have a web presence, this is going to be disconcerting, to say the least. So we looked him up online, 2 entries. There was only 2 entries.
And his death.
Right, his obituary and 1 picture. And now it's 2007. He'd been dead since 1995. Last show he'd had was in '98 at NOMA. And I was concerned. The only other thing that was a saving grace was we looked at the auction records, and he had sold over 200 works at auction, which is phenomenal when you get right down to it. You're in the Rodrigue category, et cetera, if you've sold 200 works at an auction at that time. So we knew he was kind of viable, but he disappeared completely electronically, and so we had a big heart-to-heart talk. And I first asked my wife, because that's the first thing you should do, and I said, if we are to pursue this, then we're going to, this will be full-time, we'll have to learn to sell art, we'll have to put up a web page, we'll have to do all of these things to get this guy, to brand this guy back and bring him back to life. And it's going to be hard, because as we were introduced, she alluded to, that he could be a difficult character. And what had happened, what we discovered right away, was the entrenched hierarchy of the art community of New Orleans, so to speak, had only seen Rockmore in his final decade. He'd been doing this since 1950, but that last 10 years, that 85 to 95, that's
when a lot of people remembered him, mostly when we started going out.
Right, and by that time, the alcohol had fairly consumed him. He still was prolific. He claimed to have done 15,000 works in his lifetime. We 100% believe it at this point. At the time, we didn't. We thought, that's crazy, do 15,000 works. How could anybody do that? Mom explained to us that he was just possessed and driven. He had to do art. The art had to come out of him, and so that was the start of the adventure. What we did, since we didn't know anything at that particular moment, is we contacted the New Orleans Arts Council. And Mary Lynn Costa was so nice, and Jean Menery, I think it was his name too. But they couldn't have been nicer, and we said, we don't know anything about art or anything else like that, but we know that we need help. We need help learning how to document this, how a curator would want to see it. We need help on taking the pictures and setting everything up. And she said, well, my daughter Lenora just graduated from the Delaware Art School, and she's available for hire. So, as a curator, right. So we hired Lenora. And Lenora, now curator at the Longview Gardens, who has worked at every institution, it seems like.
She was great.
Right.
She had to put up with us.
Right, and we knew nothing about art, to be quite honest with you. Mom knew everything about art, and that was quite exciting, because as we started going around, Mom became the belle of the ball. She knew the artist, she knew about the past, she knew the museums he'd been in, what his reputation was, et cetera, et cetera. And that was exciting too, when your mom's 85 at the time, and you see her come to life, and all of a sudden engaging all sorts of people, and talking the talk and walking the walk, and we were sort of the entourage. That was fun, that was exciting, and we thought, well, let's go with this and see what happens.
And then he'd wake up one night, and he said, like, it's not only about him, it's about his parents too. The parents, and he started researching all this stuff, and he's like, they're very important. So then we started looking into it, and then the story just grew. This was a family of artists, an American family of artists growing up together, and they were all fantastic.
Right, his parents had been two of the most famous artists in New York in the 40s. Magazine spreads between them. Their name was Davis, which was what our artist's name was at the time as well. He was the Wonder Prodigy. He was in the Metropolitan, in MoMA, in the Whitney. He was collected personally by Joseph Hirshhorn when he was 20 years old. And the guy had a pedigree out to here. The only problem was, as Jackson Pollock and Andy Warhol and those guys were becoming famous in New York, he, the realist in the school of Reginald Marsh, etc., he wasn't going to play that game. Not that he couldn't have played that game, not that he couldn't have done that type of art. He just wasn't going to do it. In fact, he was so disgusted with the art establishment that he was going to leave New York, change his name to his mother's maiden name, because that would really get her, and reinvent himself down in New Orleans as Rockmore. And that's exactly what he proceeded to do. And so it's 1959, and he takes a trip down here, and Max Hill and now Naomi Marshall, they welcome him, and everybody recognized his talent, and he had a pedigree as well. And so they start introducing him around, and they eventually introduce him to Larry Borenstein, and he becomes under Larry's tutelage. Larry is running an art studio called Associated Artists, and one day the custodian, he's having Xavier DeCalate sketch the custodian, and the custodian is sitting there, and he said, well, what did you do before you were custodian? And Punch Miller says, well, I was a jazz musician, but the jazz kind of passed us by. And so Larry said, well, bring your trumpet tomorrow, and we'll let you sketch it with the trumpet. That'll be fun. So Punch comes by the next day, and he has his trumpet, and Xavier DeCalate is sketching it, and Larry says, well, can you play the thing? You know, let's hear it. Let's hear it. What do you got? What do you got? Punch starts to play the trumpet, and people start walking into the gallery. And Larry Borenstein, who at one point owned a third of the French Quarter, whatever, no fool, he said, well, what about your friends? You got friends? He goes, yeah, I got friends. He goes, well, let's gather them together. Let's have a little pass the hat here in the old art studio, and we'll see what develops. And the rest, as we know, is history. And then he decided to consign his friend Rockmore to start sketching all the musicians. Meanwhile, and you're gonna talk now. All of a sudden, we're gonna talk about the first time you saw the art on the sidewalk.
Right. Well, I was in the French Quarter, and I noticed there was a little shop, and on the sidewalk, leaning against the front of the shop, was a painting, unsigned, of a small child sitting in an abandoned car in one of the projects, and I was quite moved by this painting, and asked about the artist, and was referred to Larry Borenstein. And I talked to Larry, and through Larry I met Noel, and Noel and I became friends, a friendship that lasted the rest of his life. And he did, at one time my oldest son was quite ill. Larry used to have a gathering at his place on Royal Street. He had a gallery on Royal Street, and Saturday morning he had a group of artists and writers who met and had coffee and just talked. And I was delighted to be included in that group. And Noel was included in that group as well. When my oldest son became ill, I was not able to go. So Noel said, well, we'll stay in touch because I'll send you a sketchbook of what's going on in the quarter, and we can stay in touch that way. And I said, well, I'm not sure I can afford that. He said, what can you afford? And I mentioned a modest figure, and he said, that'll do it. So for over a year, I had a sketchbook from Rockmore, quite remarkable. And so we became friends, and we stayed friends for the rest of his life. And but I think that the most important thing is the work itself. I think Noel was a first-rate artist, a great artist. And his work is now available to be seen, and to help enrich our lives. And I'm delighted to be here and to be able to talk with you about the artists. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go a little further because I still have 8 minutes left, if that's okay. But so we decide to bring Noel back to life. How do you do that? How do you do that when the artist has completely passed away and it seems impossible? We first approached all the New York museums. Said, hey, we have your guy, Noel Davis, right here in Louisiana, you know, and they said, your thing says Rockmore. That's not Noel Davis. Rockmore is a whole different guy. And we said, no, it's the same guy. He's in your museums. We made no headway with any of the curatorial staff in New York. Even at the Hirshhorn Museum, we would go visit in person. We went to the U.S. Army Archives, and we saw 44 of his parents' works, but no go. So then we put up the website, and we said, hey, got Rockmores? Contact us. And people started contacting us from across the country, saying, hey, we've got Rockmores, we've got Rockmores. Victor Potemkin was one of the biggest Cadillac dealers in the world. His heirs started contacting us. All of a sudden, we're overwhelmed with all these people that have Rockmores. So we start putting them up on the website, and we're driving and trying to get that museum show, because Mom wants the show at MoMA. So we said, well, let's not start with MoMA, let's start close to MoMA. And we came to New Orleans, and we went and visited all the museums, and they all said, oh, yes, we know the guy. Boy, he drank a lot, didn't he? Yeah, but he was a great artist. Yeah, he was. And yeah, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, he documented everyone. He did Jimmy Carter for Time Magazine, but everybody knew of Rockmore. They were receptive, they were nice, they weren't interested in doing a show. That wasn't going to happen. It's been done. 98, the retrospective at NOMA in 98. It was interesting too, because Mom had Bill Fagley, we went and met with him, and so now it's 2008, 10 years later, and she wants a retrospective again. Bill goes, well, we already did it. There's other artists that deserve their chance now. And Mom says, is there another artist that's getting a chance that's as good as Noel Rockmore, in your opinion, Bill? At which point, Bill, he sort of backed down on that one. And then we apologized, and he goes, never apologize for your mother. Your mother is the reason that this art is still here. Your mother is the reason that this man has become relevant and is still relevant. And so that was a valuable lesson learned at that particular
It's important to note that she also had a movie made.
Right, a documentary in 1992, as Rockmore was coming to the end of his life. She had the foresight to professionally hire a crew to document this guy so that there would be a record of a nice professionally done film, half-hour film. So she produced that. That we found in the storage. We found every brochure. We found 30 sketchbooks, all with finished works in them, 35 years worth of correspondence between my mom and Rockmore, and she kept her drafts. So
of my letters
right,
to him.
Right, because
he would say, well, you said this or that, and often I didn't say this or that. So I kept a record of my letters to him as well as his letters to me, so I could always say, this is exactly what I said.
And it was often over negotiations of the final prices, which always seemed to change as Rockmore had more needs.
But that made it easy. Everything was documented, everything signed, everything labeled. For our job, even though it took us a while to figure it out, because she really did all that work. She had it all together.
It was all together. And so we became the documentary researchers. We hired all of our 5 kids at some point to transcribe these works, scan them in, post them up on the website.
Still doing it.
Right, post them up. And now more and more works are coming in. All of a sudden, the Bornstein family contacts us, the Jaffe family, and we're getting more and more Rockmores. And it's getting exciting, and we can't get a show. We can't get anybody to even talk about a show. And then one day, some guy from LaGrange, Georgia calls and says, hey, I got some Rockmores here, why don't you all come down? Now, as a Jewish boy growing up in Baton Rouge, I've been told not to stop in LaGrange. And the interstate stopped a long time ago in LaGrange, and I'd just been told, if anything happens, don't get out of the car in LaGrange. It's near Anniston, there was trouble there, it's just not, so I said, sure, we'd love to come document your Rockmores, where are you? He goes, I'm in LaGrange, Georgia, and I thought, oh no, how But we went down. Turned out he was a captain of industry, an entrepreneur, also a Rockmore collector, and he organized a three-venue exhibition of 250 of Shirley's works in LaGrange, Georgia, which all of a sudden bubbled us up to attention. There was an AP article that came out, and you get a mixed bag when you get articles because you don't get to write the articles. You just take what you get. This guy, a young guy in his 30s, was so focused on all of Rockmore's exploits. And the guy had a lot of exploits. We're not here to talk about the exploits, we're here to talk about the art. But the exploits are really distracting. And so he focused in on that, and that was unusual. We got attention, and we tried to parlay it. I'm calling around trying to get the next show, pressing the different museums. I pressed the Louisiana Arts and Science Museum in Baton Rouge because that's Mom's hometown, and wouldn't that be wonderful to have an exhibition in her hometown in her 90th year, etc. And I'm pressing Elizabeth Weinstein, who's the curator who wrote the article that is in the magazine. And Elizabeth is saying, well, you know, we have a lot of things, this, that, and the other. And then all of a sudden I get a call from her one day, and she goes, we're ready to do the Rockmore show. And I said, great, how did that happen? She goes, well, my mom and your mom are in the same senior center in Baton Rouge, and they invited me to do a talk I thought about curating, and it turned out to be a question and answer on why Rockmore doesn't have a show at the Louisiana Arts and Science Museum. She goes, and the timing is good, let's do it. So lo and behold, this became the summer of Rockmore. We were so excited, and Mom goes way back to Earl K. Long. There's an a 5-week summer series that's occurring here on Earl K. Long. And so she wants to go to that. And so meanwhile, my wife and I have moved back to New Orleans to get this Rockmore thing going. And we come, and it's wonderful. It is absolutely fantastic. You name it, we loved it. We loved this place, and we felt very welcomed here. It was awesome. The second week, David Johnson comes up. Says, you're the Rockmore folks. He goes, that would make an interesting article, you know. I'm sorry I missed the show. And we said, the show hasn't started yet. He goes, yeah? He goes, well, maybe we could get an article together in time for the show. And I said, I think the curator has done a great job. One of the things Elizabeth Weinstein did at the Louisiana Arts and Science Museum, she took 50 of the top works that she could get her hands on, not necessarily all from Mom. She took 50 of those top works, and she made it G-rated. First thing she said when she saw us, we're a family museum. There's nothing that is going to come in here that a 3-year-old can't look at and enjoy. Because our guy, amongst everything else, he did a lot of nudes. He considered himself the dean of the nudes, etc., etc. And so she let us know right off the bat. That turned out to be the biggest blessing there ever was. Because the works that she selected were masterworks, and when David went to see the works, it was perfect, and she'd already written a beautiful essay about, and this was another thing. Elizabeth said, I don't want to just make it a show about Rockmore, I want to make it a show about Rockmore and the patron that saved him. Now, if we had gone into any museum anywhere and said, this is what we want to do, we want to have a show about Rockmore and celebrate my mom at the same time, and you know, that wouldn't have. That was Elizabeth's idea, and she goes, I want these guys electronically cemented together so that when people research in the future, they will realize not only was there a genius master artist here, but there was also a lady that believed in him through thick and thin, even after his death, kept the stuff together, and after Katrina was willing, along with my wife, to go on this adventure.
On that note, the show is still up until October 6th, and then upstairs is incredible. It's the French Quarter, and it's just incredible.
And all the images that you see in the magazine, those are on display at the show. So lo and behold, not only did we get that awesome show with a great big opening, now we're at the LEH, and Rockmore's on the cover, and it's probably it probably doesn't get better than this. At one point, we're at the Louisiana Arts and Science Museum, and my mom is signing autographs on the programs that they have there, and she looks and she goes, "This is amazing. They're celebrating Rockmore. They're celebrating me for helping to save them." And I'm getting to do it with you guys. She goes, it just doesn't get any better than this. And we have a saying in the temple that's called Dayenu, which means that would be enough. You don't have to do anything more from this point on. It would be enough. But we're doing more. We're going up. We've started a nonprofit foundation. We put together a Kickstarter book so that we could document the journey of Shirley and the discovery of Rockmore, everything that we've just sort of condensed into that little spiel. And we got it funded. Unfortunately, somebody decided to do the Kickstarter project in the middle of the show, et cetera, and then there was only 2 weeks left, and we had to raise $15,000.
You're looking at me.
Right, that was me. I was the one, and my wife stood.
And I kept saying, isn't it a little early?
Right. Isn't it time to start working on the Kickstarter thing? So in 2 weeks, we were able to raise the funds to do the book, which is our next project, which will be out in December, that will document our story. And now, I'm just going to mention one last thing, and then we're going to go on to the break in the next week. These works are all from Shirley's collection, and they just give you an idea of the scope of Rockmore. And if you want to talk about any of them afterwards, we can do that. I'm reading the magazine this morning, the LEH, and I wanted to particularly read all the different stories. We knew Gina Phillips is one of the artists in there. And I grew up in Baton Rouge in 1970. My friend and I, Marshall, decided we would be the ambassadors of goodwill to LSU because they had just integrated the basketball team with Collis Temple and the football team with Laura Hinton and Mike Williams. And so we would go and we'd get their autographs repeatedly because we wanted them to have support. But there was tons of kids there, and they were so well received. I was proud of LSU, etc. in that moment. This morning, I read the article on the speaker that's coming up that was the first student in 1953 when LSU was integrated, and I was blown away. I was blown away by the article, I was blown away by the writing, and you guys are in for a treat. The second part is my wife read the article on duck hunting.
Feels like you're there.
Right, she goes, I know you're not a hunter. She goes, but if you read this article, you're never going to be a hunter. And I started reading it, and it got to, I'll ruin it for you. It got to the point where the young man has shot the duck, and he now has to wring the neck of the duck. Rite of passage, a ritual, etc., etc. And I'm saying in our apartment, no, don't wring the neck of the duck. It's not worth it. But it was very moving, and we're very excited that we're going to be able to hear from him as well, because that's a wonderful story. So, and last but not least, I got to thank Brian Boyles, because Brian, he held our hand through everything, through the sign-up process, through the You're OK Long lecture, through the submission, through getting this slideshow up. Brian is a master of all trades. I think the LEH is very fortunate to have him. He's our guy. And I'll make a pitch. I think Michael Sartisti should be the director of the LEH for life, and I think we can start a movement for that, and he's more than willing to do it because it's an amazing story. And when you look at the magazine and think this has been going on for 24 years of that type of publication, that's awesome. So, thank you all for coming, and we appreciate